Pedagogy is an important part of our everyday lives as teachers. However, how often do we actually stop, reflect, and develop on our pedagogical strategies and practices? Mini lessons are a great place to do just that, and that's what we're going to have a look at today. Hi, I'm Beck, and as a teacher I've really enjoyed working in small groups because it gave me the opportunity to really target my students' individual needs, as well as develop my own pedagogy. As time conscious as we are, pedagogy does not need to be a burden on our shoulders. We just need a couple of really handy strategies to have in our toolbox. Today we're going to have a look at a mini lesson from Maths Pathway to see just how easy it is to unpack and build in really good strategies to get the most out of your time working in small groups with your students. This is the angles mini lesson. The objective is for students to identify different angles, make some observations, and use those observations to sort angles into different categories. Let's get started. Straight away from the introduction, I can see some vocabulary. This is a great opportunity to point out to students that some of these words actually have a different meaning depending on the context. For example, acute or obtuse. However, we're going to use it in this mathematical context today. This actually might be a teachable moment, it could be a reflection moment, or just something to keep in mind as you go on with your lesson so that students can engage. Also in the introduction, I can see that there's an activity where students are moving around pens to create angles. This is a great active participation moment. Now, whilst it might be tempting to move past this activity or grab the pens and start doing it yourself, this is an opportunity for you to start to see what students know before your lesson progresses. Instead of the pens, you might like to have some other options on hand. For example, some drumsticks, or asking students to create the angles using their bodies. At this time, I'm also going to add a little reminder to myself. It can be quite tempting to stop, teach, and correct at this time. However, don't. Checking for understanding is the chance for you to formatively understand where your students are at before the lesson gets underway. What do they know? What do they not know yet? And are there any misconceptions? In this case, I'm going to use the strategy whip around or pass. For example, it's only a quick whip around and pass. It can give me a lot of information that I can use as my lesson progresses. For example, later on, I might strategically use a think aloud to target one of my students' misconceptions without it hijacking or delaying my lesson. The next section is demonstration. This is the you time. This is the I do part of the gradual release model. This is the time to give students your insight. For that reason, we're going to do examples, non-examples, and some think alouds. Because I've been looking at my class data, I know the students that will be participating in this mini lesson have a bit of a problem with right angles, particularly when they start to rotate or flip. In this case, I'm going to include some examples and non-examples where I've got some right angles that will turn and shift and flip to show that they are still right angles. A part of this conversation is including a think aloud where I give insight into my own thoughts. For example, when I see this symbol, it's telling me that, even though I might not be the most precise drawer, it's communicating to myself and others that this in fact is a right angle. Another example and non-example that I may want to include is around the arrows. For example, when the arrow is inside the shape, it is showing an acute angle. However, when the arrow is on the outside of the shape, it might be showing something like a reflex angle. And once again, there's some active participation that I don't want to skip. In the next section, direct pairs of students, I also might want to have a think. Do I want to do a think pair share? Do I need to review working with pair expectations? Or do I even need to remind students that everyone is expected to participate? Also in the demonstration section, I can see something that says, ask students to check their understanding. I might want to stop and have a think about how I'm actually going to do that. Will I use mini whiteboards and some self-reflection? Or I might want to use some open questioning techniques. For example, along the Bloom's taxonomy. I might ask some compare and contrast questions that can come in handy later on. Or I might want to pop in a concept map because I can see that this lesson is moving towards complementary and supplementary angles. It might be great to start jotting down students' ideas, some patterns that they're observing, their similarities and differences, and questions that they still have. And now we're at the end of the lesson, the discussion. Now discussions are great, but they don't always leave me with next actions or students understanding their next actions. So in this case, I'm going to pop in a post-it note exit ticket asking students what questions do they still have. I'm going to use this information to plan my target intervention, another mini lesson, or just casually checking in with students as I'm walking around the classroom. And there you have it, a couple of minutes, some good pedagogical strategies, and you're walking into your next mini lesson feeling really prepared.